In 1509, the reign of one of the most significant kings in English history came to an end. Henry VII, the first Tudor king who had united the country following the conclusion of the Wars of the Roses, had a brutal death inside of his royal palace, and for years his health had been failing. But one of the biggest impacts of his death was that his son, King Henry VIII, came onto the throne, and he would change England forever. And of course he is known for his brutality and the fact he had 6 wives. But following the death of Henry VII, the first Tudor king had his internal organs, including his heart, cut out from his body, and they were removed to preserve the rest of his body. They were buried in a separate container, but there is a possibility today that the royal corpse of Henry VII may actually be in a relatively good condition and may still be lifelike. But what was found inside of his burial vault? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Henry VII was never meant to be king. He was born in 1457 in Pembroke Castle, Wales, and he spent much of his youth in hiding or in exile as the Wars of the Roses raged between the rival houses of Lancaster and of York. When he seized the throne from Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, Henry was the last man standing in the Lancaster line. His victory ended decades of civil war and began the Tudor dynasty. In the 24 years that followed, Henry VII rebuilt England from chaos. He restored order, strengthened royal authority, and repaired the crown's finances. After years of war, he married Elizabeth of York, uniting the warring houses, and together they created a new image of stability. Under Henry, the monarchy became cautious and bureaucratic rather than reckless and warlike. But that stability came at a personal cost. Henry VII was careful, secretive, and suspicious to his end. His reign was marked by tight control, heavy taxation, and mistrust of those around him. These qualities, which had once kept him alive, would isolate him in his final years. The decline of Henry VII began in February of 1503, when his beloved wife, Queen Elizabeth of York, died shortly after giving birth to a daughter, Catherine, who would also not survive. Elizabeth had been the only person who could soften Henry's coldness. Her death devastated him. Chroniclers described Henry's grief as intense and genuine, and according to one account, he locked himself away for days, refusing to eat or speak to anyone. For a man who had always kept his emotions hidden, it was a rare glimpse of deep sorrow. After her death, Henry became a different man. He withdrew from court life, lost interest in festivities, and grew increasingly ill and melancholy. The lively Tudor court that had once celebrated peace and prosperity fell into a quieter, more sombre rhythm. His health began to deteriorate, and his suspicious nature deepened. In his final years, Henry suffered from a series of ailments that slowly wore him down. He was plagued by what chroniclers called a consumption of the lungs, probably tuberculosis or chronic bronchitis. He grew thin, pale, and constantly tired. The king became reclusive, spending long hours in his private chambers or at his palaces in Richmond and Greenwich. He trusted only a few advisers and grew increasingly paranoid about plots and betrayals. Even his closest courtiers walked carefully in his presence, and despite his sickness, Henry never abandoned his obsession with money and control. He personally oversaw financial matters, ensuring that every debt was paid and every fine was collected. He also grew notorious for his use of financial agents like Edmund Dudley and Richard Empson, who squeezed money out of nobles and merchants on the king's behalf. This earned Henry VII a reputation for greed and stinginess, traits that would stain his memory even as his reforms stabilised England's treasury. His health caused significant problems. He struggled with his eyesight and also had few teeth, of which many had gone black. By early 1509, it was clear the king's health was failing rapidly. He was around 52 years old, not an old age by modern standards, but considered late middle age in early 16th century. It was said at the time that Henry had developed a chronic cough which was particularly severe in springtime. The condition became progressively more severe and associated with loss of weight and general wasting, and in 1507 and 08, Henry's spring cough became more troublesome. He retreated to Richmond Palace, his favourite residence by the River Thames. The air there was cleaner than in London, and it offered peace and quiet. But even in these final weeks, Henry could not fully rest. He was preoccupied with ensuring that his son, Prince Henry, the future Henry VIII, would inherit a stable and respected crown. He spent his last months arranging his finances and reviewing his will. He ordered lavish religious endowments for his soul's salvation and gave large sums to religious institutions. In keeping with medieval beliefs, he hoped that prayers for his soul would ease his passage through purgatory. Henry also reconciled with many of those he had wronged, releasing some prisoners and cancelling certain fines. This sudden generosity suggested that he was conscious of his sins and anxious about the afterlife. He even made plans for his burial. He would be laid to rest beside his beloved wife, Elizabeth, in Westminster Abbey, beneath a magnificent marble tomb he had commissioned from the Italian sculptor Pietro Torrigiano. In March of 1509, Henry VII's condition worsened. He developed a persistent cough and a fever that led him too weak to walk. His courtiers and physicians attended him around the clock at Richmond Palace, and chroniclers say that the smell of incense and the sound of priests praying filled his room as his body declined. He was visited by his mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, and his son, Prince Henry, and the king reportedly gave his son advice on ruling wisely and avoiding the mistakes of tyranny and greed. Advice the young prince would famously ignore. On the 21st of April 1509, King Henry VII died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by clergy and attendants. He was said to have confessed his sins and received the last rites of the church before his death. It was said, unable to eat and struggling for breath, Henry's mind was fixated on the hereafter. On Easter Sunday, the 8th of April, emaciated and in intense pain, he staggered into his privy closet, where he dropped to his knees and crawled to receive the sacrament. Later, as Henry lay amid mounds of pillows, cushions and bolsters, throat rattling, gasping for breath, he mumbled again and again that, if it pleased God to send him life, they should find him a very changed man. Henry made an exemplary death, eyes fixed intensely on the crucifix held out before him, lifting his head up feebly towards it, reaching out and enfolding in his thin arms, kissing it fervently, beating it repeatedly upon his chest. Immediately after his death, the royal physicians got to work, embalming the body of the first Tudor king. They cut open his chest and made a large cavity by removing his heart, liver, and other internal organs, such as his intestines and lungs. This was done as tradition for royals in an attempt to preserve the body. These organs were then placed inside of a separate lead-lined container and box, and his body was washed in perfumes and was then prepared inside of a lead-lined coffin. The lead inside of the wooden coffin would offer more protection against decay and rot, but the body had also been wrapped in a thick cerecloth, a wax-dipped shroud, which was aimed to preserve the remains more. Now Henry VII was buried inside of a royal vault at the heart of Westminster Abbey, inside of his Lady Chapel, alongside his Queen, Elizabeth of York. But the burial vault of Henry VII was opened a number of times over the years. Following the death of the final Tudor Queen, Elizabeth I, she was interred inside the vault for some years, but her coffin was then removed and placed inside of a separate vault. But there was also another change when the coffin of the first Stuart king, James I, was placed within the vault too. The man who opened the vault and discovered it claimed it was with a feeling of breathless anxiety amounting to solemn awe which caused the humblest of workmen employed to whisper in bated breath, as a small opening at the apex of the arch admitted the first glimpse into the mysterious secret which had hereto eluded this long search. The burial vault was rather small, and the floor was in pristine condition, and there was no condensation. The coffins were said to have been in very good condition too. However, there was a deadly chill inside of the vault. Both of the coffins of Henry VII and Elizabeth were lead, and the wooden casing had been removed to fit James inside. The coffins were shaped at the head and shoulders, and Henry's had a lead inscription plate that said, "Here lies Henry VII, King of England, France and Ireland, who died on the 21st day of April in the 24th year of his reign, and in the year of our Lord 1509. Now, due to the conditions of the vault, it's very possible that the remains of Henry VII were well preserved, and today his corpse may be intact due to the lead-lined coffin and also the cerecloth inside protecting and wrapping the remains. If true, this means that the first Tudor king's body may be as fresh as the day he died 500 years later." Thank you for watching, and to support, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.